When people think of a disease, they think of something that is degenerative and that will hurt you and kill you. Autism is not a disease. It is a developmental disability. It's about living our best possible lives with this condition.
Hello classmates, yes, today we're going to be talking about autism in girls, but first of all, what is autism? Well, according to licensed therapist Katie Martin, ASD or autism spectrum disorder is a developmental condition that is marked by social and communication difficulties as well as repetitive and flexible patterns of behavior. This disorder affects about 1 in 59 children, and boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with ASD than girls. That's because autism appears differently in girls than it does in boys. Girls are actually better at hiding the symptoms of autism. That can lead to them being undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. They might also learn they have the disorder later in their life. It's also important to note that autism is most often disregarded in girls that are on the lower range of the spectrum because the symptoms are less obvious. First of all, let's present the symptoms of autism according to the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Number 1. Persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, like deficits in social-emotional reciprocity, deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Number 2. Restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities such as repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech, insistence on sameness or inflexible adherence to routines. Highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. And number 3. These disturbances are not better explained by intellectual disability or global developmental delay. Now that we know more about autism itself, let's jump into the topic of autism in girls. The hypothesis for why girls are less likely to be diagnosed with ASD is that girls actually develop socially more quickly than boys, so if they're behind, it's less noticeable. Let's get into the symptoms and signs of ASD in girls and how it's different from the symptoms present in boys. In a social interaction, girls will use the same parts of their brain as a non-autistic person would to interact. But boys with ASD actually use different parts of their brain to talk to other people. Usually, autistic boys will enjoy being alone, or they will want to control the situation they are in. And as for girls with ASD, they like actually interacting with their peers. Girls with autism will observe their female peers and they will copy them. That's actually why they like to read fiction novels, and they also like to drift off into their thoughts. That's also why they make good actresses and singers, because they're able to copy other people so well. That can also have a toll on them because they've been acting all day. They might come home and be irritating because they're drained from all that acting they did. In general, boys have less social rules. Therefore, girls with autism will tend to want to play with them because they can be themselves. Girls with ASD don't have as many repetitive behaviors as boys with ASD. They have the same interests as other girls. They might just seem more hyper-focused on them. So for example, if they see that other girls like Barbies, they might buy Barbies, but instead of putting them into situations, they will place them in a way that's visually pleasing. We've talked about earlier how autistic people don't necessarily understand nonverbal communication or expressions. So for example, a girl with ASD might not understand the meaning of Netflix and chill, which implies having sex. Therefore, girls with ASD are much more likely to be sexually assaulted. Because ASD in girls can be so hard to see, autistic girls tend to be misdiagnosed, like mentioned before, or they have what we call comorbid disorders, which are other diagnoses. Also, because women with ASD tend to be so rigid about their schedules, or they are very focused on a certain subject, they might be diagnosed with OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. People with OCD tend to have obsessions that result in repetitive gestures. People with autism also can be emotionally sensitive and unstable. So they might be diagnosed with BPD or borderline personality disorder, which is a disorder defined by people who have an unstable self-image or emotions. And they can also be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is defined by long periods of ups and downs. Because autistic women like to copy their peers because they want to fit in, they're much more likely to have anorexia or other eating disorders because skinny is seen as being the norm. Because people with this disorder have difficulty with communication, so eye contact and interactions, They can have social anxiety, for example, or depression.
Here are some myths about autism. Girls with ASD don't look autistic.
I don't know, I always get the you don't look autistic thing. Autism is like an internal thing, not an external thing. No one looks autistic.
Autistic people have emotions just like everyone.
Definitely would disagree with the idea that we're not emotional. I think we are actually highly emotional. I think that many times we don't express it the way that people expect. We're feeling it, it's there, it just might not come out. And then other times it might be overly expressed.
All people with autism are not only interested in science. Some people with ASD, like Mozart, for example, were more interested in music. Others, like Temple Grandin, who sure has done a lot in the animal science field, but has also written many books, were more interested in writing.
Autism is uncurable and it doesn't need to be fixed. But it can certainly be hard for autistic children and adults to function in the real world, so certain treatment options or techniques can certainly help them. So there are treatment options that you might have heard of, like speech therapy, which helps someone with their verbal and nonverbal communication. Psychotherapy might also help someone with autism. It's when you sit down and see a psychologist. One of the examples for psychotherapy is talk therapy, where a client talks to a therapist who then helps them. There are also treatment options that are less known. Floor time therapy, for example, is especially good for children with ASD. It involves playing with the child the way they want to play. Floor time therapy is often done with ABA therapy, and ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. ABA therapy is put in place in an autistic person's life in order to improve their social, motor, and verbal skills. RDI therapy, or Relationship Development Intervention Therapy, is necessary for parents with a child with ASD. It addresses the symptoms of autism in a family setting. It provides the child with tools to form social bonds with others. In conclusion, knowing that autism is a spectrum and that it shows itself differently depending on someone's gender, I believe that ASD shouldn't be disregarded or overlooked by professionals. I also don't think that autism is more common in boys. I just think that most research has been done on boys with ASD, so what I would like to see in the future is more research being done with girls with autism.
Girls with ASD also have challenges to overcome, and knowing what possibly holds them back can help them tremendously to have the best possible life.
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken part.